Good morning, everyone. I'm Robin Grabfelder. Thank you for joining us today on EA Zoom for our 2024 Mid-Year Astrology Update. We will explore some significant astrological events and transits that will shape the rest of this year. We're honored to have a panel of esteemed astrologers who will share their expertise and perspectives. And we're going to have two panels today, and the second panel will begin at noon. On our first panel, we have Michelle Dench, Chahal, Fyler, and we may be joined by Jordan Smith if her internet comes on, and we have Sue Hillyard. Okay. All right. So, Michelle, would you like to start with, did you have
with the presentations?
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, one of the things I wanted to just speak about in general, as we've gone through this year, a lot of the focus has been on the presence of Pluto moving into Aquarius and these sort of final last throes of change that we're amidst. This has been deeply initiated by the eclipses that we had in March, April. And I think for me as an astrologer, the one thing that I've been focusing on is the presence of Saturn and Neptune finishing their transits in the sign of Pisces. And I'll share a little bit because I was just looking. Let's see, here's my thing. So this is November 4th. I'm going to actually go back to the present moment because I think this is really, really significant. Mars just recently entered the sign of Gemini, and right away it kicks off a trine, an opening trine to Pluto. And Saturn and Neptune have been recently stationed retrograde in the sign of Pisces. And, this progression of Mars into Gemini is initiating us towards the square of both Mars and Jupiter with Neptune and and Saturn. And I think the Saturn square is particularly significant relative to the transition of Pluto back into the sign of Capricorn. If we think about this on a collective level, the Pluto and Capricorn period has been a significant foundational dismantling of a, a level of consciousness within our society, which we might even call colonialism or patriarchy. But in particular, like this is Capricorn, the foundations of life itself. Capricorn Cancer, representative of those foundations. And we've had the nodes of the moon in Aries and Libra, which to me has reflected the full scope of the dynamic. Masculine, feminine, mother, father, these very foundational human elements of consciousness, and where we find our safety, our stability, our structure, our security. And then we've had Uranus in the sign of Taurus emphasizing the destabilization of financial structures, of consciousness itself. Because what happens as we start to break down, the structures of our lives is that we start to see what has formed those belief systems. And this is where Saturn Neptune comes in, because that square to Gemini is really the distinction between, do our belief systems originate from our ideas, and in particular ideas that are propagated into human consciousness, or and in fact, like for example, the advent of AI in this time period, right? The growth and development of things like GPT, or where we have a consciousness that is not necessarily a human consciousness, but is created by human consciousness to provide thought. And that's a really interesting phenomenon. of how that impacts and influences people. If we were going to break this down in our individual lives, this has meant a real destabilization of the core foundations of relationship. In order for us to understand how to be in relationship with one another in a different way, I would just say that we are coming out of an era where even in the last 100 years, so much of our conditioning and consciousness around relationship has been formed and then dismantled in these last very, very short amount of years. So with this last Pluto in Capricorn, where Saturn will be ruling that Pluto. And this is also the last cycle of Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Now, Neptune's cycle is, going to go around 184 years. Saturn will come around again to Pisces in 30 years again, but together they will never come around in this lifetime in the physical bodies that we have incarnated in. So this is really an ending of a huge, what I would call ancestral chapter of our evolution, where we can literally see that once we cross a particular threshold, and for me, that threshold starts to tip more significantly as we get to November of this year. We won't ever go back to these places ever again, but they will become the ground upon which our evolutionary foundation is setting itself up. Whatever we're building from after all this dismantling will be coming based on this. And, Mars and Gemini is really that leading edge of thought and ideas. And in trying to Pluto, that can be an acceleration of innovation and innovative thought in conjunction to Jupiter and to Saturn, and in square to Saturn, Neptune. This can be a dismantling of places where ideology in particular has disillusioned people. And we'll be faced with the conflict of Virgo or Sagittarius as the resolution points of these transits. Virgo being, do we do the hard work of discerning and clarifying for ourselves what information is needed, analyzing and really taking critical lens to the thoughts that are being presented in the world? And Sagittarius, do we also follow those thoughts up to whether or not they actually align with an inner sense of truth, with natural law, with what we know to be true from the inside, not what we have been taught to be true? And, you can be taught a lot of things that are embedded in sort of ancient systems of keeping people oppressed or depressed, or, for example, being taught that the Western medical system is the only way to find healing, and that pharmaceuticals are the way to heal your body. And then find yourself in a situation where you've been sick for years, only to come to realize that the medicine that's supposed to be making you better is making you sicker, and that there is an alternative to that that requires you to completely dismantle the way that you've been believing in something and take on a different perspective about your own healing journey, right? A lot of this is our claiming of a self-responsibility in the face of collective ideas, collective thoughts, collective beliefs. And where people have not been trained to be both in community, in connection, learning together, where we've been very deeply isolated from each other, and we have not been taught to think critically or independently for ourselves. And at the same time, where we have not been encouraged to creatively actualize, because if you think about the Pluto polarity point, it's moving from Cancer during this last bit of Pluto and Capricorn to Leo, right? This is about creative self-actualization. And at the bottom line, this is the way that art contradicts social reality and disrupts it and creates a pathway for people to express themselves, to know themselves. This is about the difference between art that's created by a computer and art that's created by an individual, right? Nothing created by an individual can be replicated, but computer generated art can be mass produced in a way that dilutes the original intention of the art itself. And we're going to be dealing with these dynamics, for the next 20 years, if not longer, as this most of what we're experiencing right now at the end of this year, all the way in through, early January 2025 is the foundation point. We are literally coming to culmination energy with Pluto, with Neptune. We're going to see this happen, setting kind of the ground, and then the nodes of the moon in 2025 will switch into Pisces and Virgo. And so I think, especially right now, this summer into the fall, is a heightened time of outer planet retrograde cycles, which is not uncommon, but I always want to return people to the, to the sort of baseline thinking that the retrograde is not necessarily a slowing down, it's an acceleration of the soul's evolutionary intention. So it's moving us through these last degrees to accelerate the completion of a cycle that goes back to our ancestors' ancestors' ancestor, right? We could go back to 1776, right? 1779, that period of time when Pluto was in the end of Capricorn heading into Aquarius. And so after we see that, we have in September begins the eclipses, which what's significant to me about the September eclipses are September and October. The September one is the first lunation in the sign of Virgo, Pisces, in the sign where the nodes are still in the Aries Libra sector. And then we have the new moon in October, which actually happens to be when we're doing the EA online conference that weekend. So we'll be doing an eclipse panel for the conference that is available to all. And then we have, after those eclipses in November, early November, when Pluto makes its final ingress into Aquarius. And that's a significant ingress with the Mars opposite Pluto. Just before that ingress, sort of, I pay attention to whenever there's a faster moving planet, the moon, the sun, any of those moving through an oppositional point that has significant power and energy to the culmination of a particular sign's journey. And then later on, we start to see Saturn station direct and kind of finish up what we're undergoing right now at the end of this year. So I really think that this couldn't be one of those more powerful times, which could be quite easily, it would be quite easy to focus on certain points of it and miss a more subtle undercurrent that is guiding us through into a new evolutionary stage. So, I don't know if that's my time, but it feels like a good place to pause.
Michelle, I know we spoke earlier before the recording started. It's exactly what you were saying. We find ourselves at this particular point, and I know Nia's created the chart for today, which will be good to look at, because we find ourselves at this point with a post full moon at 29 degrees of Capricorn, where Pluto is going to transit back to before it goes back into Aquarius for that final stages, like you said. And I've personally found Saturn to be a major player this year
Mhm.
across the board for everybody. And like you mentioned, it is the structure of our consciousness. And it's the responsibility we have. It's our responsibility to step into our power, to step into helping the evolution of consciousness individually as we do it within our own lives, and then helping others collectively to progress forwards.
Mm.
So I feel Saturn is that Saturn in Pisces transit for me, and I've been saying this every time I talk about Saturn in Pisces, is a reminder of us being spiritual beings having a human experience, not the other way around. And it's our connectedness as souls that has helping humanity move forward. That Uranus in Taurus I've always seen as you know connecting back to Gaia, Earth, being grounded, going back to simplicity, the core essential truth of what this human journey is about. And it is very much about collectively moving forward, where there is that sense of oneness. You have your own individuality, of course, but knowing you're not alone. In that Pluto and Aquarius transit, the positive side of it is the tribe that you will connect with, the communities will connect with, but the negative side can also be a sense of feeling alone. Is anybody with me? I'm feeling different, looking for in rather than stepping into feeling fragmented or, associated, knowing that there is a collective consciousness that we just need to tap into.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was listening to someone speak about Saturn yesterday as, the sort of limitations that we come up against. And I think a lot of us may have felt pretty stuck in the mud coming out of COVID time. And it's not to say that COVID is gone, because I think Saturn in Pisces just simply changed the nature of how we were dealing with it.
Mm.
There's not as much isolation relative to what people are experiencing, but it doesn't mean at all that we haven't dismantled the fear and the underlying systems that have impacted people immensely. Not to mention, like, the economic impact of that whole time period has not been felt fully by anyone. And so there's this undercurrent of, I'm having to do this alone. I'm alone. I'm, maybe afraid because I've lost relationships. There's immense grief. A part of this North Node in Aries, and the Chiron in Aries especially, has been, war and violence that is political in nature, religious in nature, and devastating to human beings, and confusing for people. We're talking about things that have really brought up some of the deepest internal human conflicts of how we feel about what's happening in our world. And these are not reconcilable things, and especially not in isolation, because we can create that same polarization of, like, this is what I believe about it, or this is the information that I'm receiving. And yet we don't really know. We don't really know in so many ways what it is. We can only reference from our own soul's evolutionary perspective, right? And everyone's going to be meeting what's happening in the world at different levels of consciousness. And we can have, especially as we're going through a change, I think there are so many souls on this planet right now who are um, being accelerated from individuated, or from consensus to individuated consciousness, from individuated to spiritual consciousness. And just those changes in the level of consciousness that is destabilizing to the human being, to the human system, because there's a general dismantling of what was known and familiar that gave us a sense of purpose or meaning or security. And when we lose those things, whether it's losing a job or losing a relationship or losing your health on an individual level, or whether we lose those things collectively by something happening like violence or, catastrophic destruction to the earth, there is something that evokes that sense of powerlessness that all souls feel relative to their connection to source. And how we deal with that individually and how we deal with that collectively may seem to be at odds. Like, I've seen a lot of people moving towards being homesteaders and living off the grid. And, that's one way of dealing with it. I've seen a lot of friends of mine moving towards community and wanting to live, more tribally. And that's also one way of dealing with it, but it still brings up the economic challenges, the family dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics. Like, these are all things on an evolutionary basis we're going to be forced to face. And yeah, and I think that the Saturn piece that you're talking about, Rob, is so critical to this, because it is really kind of the limits of our consciousness, and we're going to see Saturn go all the way to the end of Pisces at, in the same way. All of these planets are really pushing us to an evolutionary edge that most of us in these bodies have not experienced yet, whatever that means for us on the other side. And so it's hard to say predictively, but I feel a sense of how significant the Saturn Neptune is, especially to our setup for next year. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, what
Can I
about
add something to
Neptune?
that?
Yeah, and what about Neptune coming into a conjunction with the North Node in Aries in the second house also? Neptune
Yeah.
at the end of Pisces,
Oh yeah.
Showing extreme delusions and idealizations,
Mhm.
and wanting to push those forward in the areas of our desires and basic security.
Mhm. It can definitely be extremely destructive from a like more human global perspective. And I think we're seeing the undercurrents of it now. Like, if we're paying attention closely, it's sort of like being the frog in the pot doesn't notice that it's being boiled.
That's exactly where
The
we're at.
water is too hot and it wants to jump out. That's the way
Yes.
I would describe it.
Yeah, I would describe America to be that right now. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking about losing so many things before.
Mhm.
And really, when it comes to Saturn, it's about the things we take as consensus,
Mhm.
talking about the
Right.
consensus level, and the laws that we all abide by. And definitely, this period is about the dismantling of these laws, of these paradigms, and the searching or questioning of new ones.
Yes,
Mhm.
So we're still
definitely.
at a stage of actually implementing new rules. We're just, out there experimenting because the old ones are breaking down. And maybe that's why we have problems with our relationships, and we have problems with our economy, and we have problems with war and peace, and with other social global issues, and the losing of faith.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah, when everything is falling apart and dissolving, people feel lost.
Well, and it's also a dismantling of old laws that had set up protections. For example, in the United States, the repealing of Roe versus Wade. This is like a highly controversial topic. And yet it was an old law from the same period of time in the 1970s where, we've got this sort of Uranus upheaval of change that had set people free, that had really given a lot of liberation. It had given women the right in the United States to have their own credit card. In 1972, women had the right to make a decision about their bodies, and then in this Saturn in Pisces time, we see those laws being changed, and a mindset that I think is wanting to emerge and show itself fully. That's, to me, the thing about the 29th degree of any sign, is that it's the full pressure. It's like the pressure of the head on the baby.
Cervix, yes, coming out.
It's that pressure itself that makes the being want to be born, but you don't know what you're going to get. You just are in what they call the ring of fire. When the head is coming, it's the most intense transition of the entire process of labor. And, it's a perfect 29th degree of Cancer metaphor for what we're going through collectively and in our own lives, where we're pushed to reevaluate the things that have been giving us security, or we are forced to grieve the things that we didn't have time, and I say forced to grieve because grief has to go somewhere. It will either decide to live in the body, or it will find its way out through the emotional body. It will permeate the collective. It'll turn into depression. It'll do all sorts of things. But to me, this is a deeper invitation for us to face the grief of being in a dying era while simultaneously facing the fear and uncertainty of being in the emergence of a new phase, a new cycle for everyone, but also individually for ourselves. This is going to mean different things for people about what they get to consider home and safety, and maybe those words can't even be found for some people, right? And based on where they're living or what they're dealing with, right? We might be so far from what was familiar that we can't really find our way back to it, even if we wanted to. So
Well, and then there are also the immense possibilities
yeah,
of what could happen, which, can be a stressor in itself, but it can
Yeah.
also bring about the excitement of, new things coming.
I was going to say excitement as well, but that's probably my Pluto in the first house. Let's just go ahead. Something new. But yeah, it's like the ending. There's something that needs to close, and it has to close. It's not about jumping right ahead, because somewhere you'll have to face that what hasn't been closed again. So right now, I feel even with the Pluto at 29 degrees, when it goes there and before it moves back into Aquarius in October, well, sorry, I think it's October or November, that there's an opportunity for us, like we've all just said, to really look at what needs restructuring, what work, Saturn, what work can I do to help others move forward as well as yourselves. There was an individual journey. We are collectively one as well. And moving forward and initiating that path forward. And like you mentioned, Michelle, earlier, with the nodes moving into Virgo, Pisces next year, that's a transitional archetype in itself, and I feel that's very much going to be a stronger threshold in people feeling like something is dissolving, that Pisces, Neptune, Virgo pointing to slow down, one step at a time wins the race, right? Taking one step in front of the other will win the race, but you're doing the work to move forward. And I feel this is very much where we're all at collectively. Are we doing our individual works to help everybody else evolve? That's where I feel I find myself at in understanding this human journey. Like we spoke earlier about the whole, what's dying is systems that don't work, and I will point to religion being one. It hasn't worked. It's a control mechanism personally, but looking at the positives of what religion provides, that oneness, that faith, and it's beautiful, connecting to Gaia, connecting to whatever gods or goddesses that you resonate with is powerful. But showing people there's a
theory.
truth in that. Sorry?
In theory.
Yes, but
Rob, what Jeffrey Wolf Green taught about the full phase opposition, he says that the opposition is the evolutionary bridge, and that the way of crossing the bridge is to take the individual purpose into social purpose, into collective purpose. you know,
Yeah.
and for those who might have been more hyper focused these last several years on just stabilizing their life and like moving through the interpersonal dynamics, I do think that the switch that's happening throughout the course of the end of this year, it will encourage all of us to make that bridge. There's such a dynamic tension with so many of the planets. Like I stopped here around November, but you can see Jupiter opposite Mercury, who will retrograde in Sagittarius, Mars opposite Pluto, Sun opposite Uranus during the Scorpio season. There that emphasizing of what has to spark each of us to cross that evolutionary bridge will be, you know, unique to each soul's journey. But I think you're speaking to it quite perfectly there.
Yeah, it's what you mentioned earlier. We have to move through the emotional body. If we
Mhm.
don't embody it, it's just going to resonate, well, develop somewhere in the body, you know, in physical pain. And just knowing if there is something like that happening in our lives, it's that caterpillar metamorphosizing into the butterfly. And it's looking at it from that perspective rather than from a negative, distorted perspective, which is, you know, very much a patriarchal perspective, I feel.
I can stop my screen share. I know, Nia, you had a charts, and if we want to
You said Mia?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
While she's
Yeah,
doing that, let me just say one thing about
Sure.
that chart that you just ended.
Uh,
That was Caraclo in Aquarius, wasn't it?
Yeah,
On the north node of Neptune,
uh-huh.
holding space for, you know,
On my son.
awesome.
Very present for me, like basically sitting on my son, retrograding back and forth. Yeah, in Aquarius much of this year.
Well,
Um,
What asteroid is that? Sorry?
Chiriclo, right here.
Right,
Chiron.
okay.
Chiron's wife,
Mhm.
Ah, okay.
and
Yeah.
she holds space for things to happen.
Yeah. And in a way, it's
D-
like when we're going through that death rebirth process, much of what we're doing is holding space for our consciousness to emerge into something new. You know, while some part of ourselves, and I know this from the times in my life where I've gone through these sort of, you know, Kundalini download awakening experiences, and then there's sort of like a bomb that goes off, and then a quiet empty space where then something new emerges within the soul, like some new desire. When we're talking about Pluto especially, but also with Mars, I think and Mars is retrograde, will be in the sign of Leo, in that very strong Leo into Cancer, right, covering those polarity points over the end of the year. We're going to be able to get in touch with some core level desire that is going to lead the way. And what we're experiencing right now may be really just the curiosity of exploring the different facets of our own thinking or our own lives, or the beliefs and the ideas that have surrounded us, and, you know, starting to rebel against that. Like when we were talking about religion, Rav, you know,
Mm.
it's throwing out religion may be part of simply shedding the institutional nature
Yeah, yeah.
while maintaining connection with the truth of source of our connection. And I had this insight last night when I was listening to Ari say something about finding the truth inside. And I was like, all of a sudden realizing the truth that we find inside isn't from an idea that we get. It isn't from the mind. The truth that we find inside is from all the other thoughts disappearing from around what is actually true, which is always inside of us. And most human beings have so much conditioning sort of built, it's like a little cocoon built around a light, that we don't see the light. We're not in connection with that most of the time, but we feel it from the inside all the time. That's you can tell something is off. This doesn't feel right. I can't follow. I can believe, you know, that Jesus was all about love and compassion. And but then as soon as people start speaking hate in his name, I have a very hard time finding that as truth. It's like, we will feel that flame kind of like come alive. And the more time is spent deconditioning those beliefs and ideas that have built up around that central truth within each and every one of us, the more I think that creative expression will start to also come forward. And we'll be able to connect with a deeper desire that is fundamental to what our purpose is, and be able to bridge that individual purpose to the social purpose.
Well, if you look at that, just this chart, you got Mercury in Sagittarius. You talk about the left and right brain balance, and your Jupiter is retrograde in Gemini, and the ruler of that is Mercury in Sagittarius. So it's exactly what you just said, going back to what is the core truth, what resonates within, and going back to natural law truth, which is sharing, caring, inclusion. And yeah, and that's the true essence of religion, is sharing, caring, inclusion, which has been distorted all the time.
Amen, sister.
Amen to that. Look at what's happening in my area.
Yeah.
I mean, we have two peoples that are engaged in ravaging each other for the last 5 or even 7 decades or more.
Yeah, more.
And every time it's getting more and more intense. The plutonic convulsions are becoming more tectonic. There's more people suffering. There's more people getting hurt. There's more need for revenge and destruction. And instead of going to that natural law we were just speaking about, people get more hung up in these paradigms that are falling apart. The more the truth shows itself, the more misery rises, the more pain, suffering, and indeed mourning as part of our daily life, the more they cling to these paradigms, they even become more radical. It's like they don't let the reality confuse them, because if they do, the whole world will fall apart. And that's something we have to be prepared for. That this is not going to be a peaceful transition. This evolutionary process that we are all part of is not a tranquil one. Death and rebirth has never been tranquil. And it is about, mourning the death of the old and indeed walking it to the gate and going through that delivery of new consciousness. But that would not be easy. And that requires immense prices that I'm terribly afraid of, I'm afraid that the human hunger for suffering has not been quenched yet. And that what we're going to see after this year and in the eve of 2026 is even more catastrophic, if we don't learn by then. And I don't think we will. And indeed, I wanna let us remember that every time that the planets that came upon in the beginning of COVID came upon in these signs in the last 1,000 years have always been times of great evolution for mankind and the dismantling of economic and political paradigms, of geopolitical shifts and great wars and great suffering, but indeed a very big update in the social consciousness and the collective consciousness and the field of human rights and individual rights and the relationships between the rulers and the ruled. And who has the power and how much of it, and the wealth. And this is what we're going through again. We're repeating it in exact dance moves as we did in the last 1,000 years. And we're not
Very
done
true.
yet. Yeah.
Very true. And being in the last degree of Neptune in Pisces and Pluto in Capricorn, I mean, we're at that final stage where, you know, people are just hanging on for dear life and fighting to keep things the way they want it to be instead of letting things move forward. I mean, not everybody, I mean, just half of the population.
Look at what's happening with LGBT rights, even in the States, even with Trump in the last few days declaring what he did. You know, it's like women rights being taken away. It's people clinging on to keeping things the way they were, not the way they are anymore.
Right.
You know,
And
Yeah.
those in power wanting to maintain it
exactly.
and using that power to influence and deceive.
And that brings me back to personal responsibility and what it is to take personal responsibility. How should we learn to take personal responsibility? And is personal responsibility taking collective responsibility as well? You know, am I my brother's keepers?
Mm.
You know, in that sense. And can I really exist in this new era without community? Is this going to be a utopic or dystopic era that we are entering into, you know? And basically that it's up to us, not them. You know, there's no us and them anymore. It's just us, you know? So yeah, moving away from that heaven and earth, from that deviation into something that is more, you know, equal and flowing and community oriented, like Aquarian age is, in a sense.
Yeah, I think the personal responsibility that you're speaking to is each person's, you know, capacity to dismantle the things from the inside that actually keep us thinking that there is an us and them.
Mhm. Yeah.
And starting to come to recognize that that can't happen on a planet where we all share the same planet. That can't happen. There
Mhm.
can't be an us and them. It doesn't
Yeah.
isn't a way to not impact one another with what we do, what we think, how we live. And I spent a good amount of time in the last several years studying with what might be considered like a utopian community model of permaculture. And they're mostly peace activists and folks who would go to um, places of war and develop, you know, ecological solutions. And even within that community, I have seen that they struggle with the very basic ways of how do we relate to one another? How do we deal with economic limitations? How do we, you know, deal with interpersonal dynamics? Because it really the level of complexity of the ball of that is intertwined, that is all of our lives and all of these different aspects, um, is too much for any one person to try and unravel individually.
Seems to be what we're really here for.
You know, every time we divide ourselves by an us and them, we're being chauvinistic. Chauvinism has been adapted into how patriarchy looks down at women. But Nicolas Chauvin, the original namesake of chauvinism, was a French patriot who invented that idea of the French people being different than any other people and better than any other nation as well. So it's two ideas combining that we are different than them and we're better than them. And being chauvinistic is not what we want to be, you know, not towards women and not towards anyone else.
Right.
Nia, were you going to
Yeah, I can share if you want.
yeah, share
We
your
have today's chart,
chart?
which is July 21st. This is the biggest I can show it to you. I don't know what's happening with my solar fire, but I hope you can see.
It's good.
So we have the sun in 29 Cancer, posing the moon in 29 Capricorn, talking about these symbols of life and, you know, structure, and indeed who we are, our essence, our identities, where we come from, what we feel is our own. And of course, every full moon is a culmination of energy, of feelings, if you want, of the birthing of the embryonic process. And we're having all these big transits happening in the background. And we're having Pluto in Aquarius, giving the amplification of that, you know, emotional undercurrent that needs to follow for us to really transcend, you know, to go through that death and rebirth process. And these full moons that we are going through, and these processes that we are going through now, as Mars and Uranus are conjunct, and we're seeing the agitation, we're seeing the, you know, electricity in the air, in a sense. We're trying to keep it calm, but it's hard. It's hard because indeed, things like in the womb are developing, broiling, you know, and they would have to spill over someday. And it's up to us to see how they will, and to make sure that once they will, we do our parts and, you know, standing against the wind, in a sense. And this, of course, is continuing till the end of the year with the processes that we've talked about before here. If we go to November 15, when the US is in one of its most pivotal times ever, you know, and we have the opposition of Mars and Pluto going on, and we have this full moon in Taurus, conjunct Uranus, talking about the return to Gaia, you know, the connection between heaven and earth, the human design integrated to the old laws of nature and material, you know, dimensions. And the sun in Scorpio, of course. And we have the opposition between Jupiter and Mercury. So everything is going on in the background while this is happening. And Uranus, of course, takes us all forward, you know. So this is a moon that already pushes our faces against the new. Here we can see already glimpses of the day to come, in a sense. Let's all hope that the dawn is a beautiful dawn and not a scary one, you know? Because who knows with what's happening in the States right now, you know? And yeah, and what's happening, I mean, I don't like to be dramatic, you know, but you can see the other charts that I've opened here, you know, Israel, Russia, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, United States, French Republic, United Kingdom, China, Iran, USA, Japan. And I've been looking at all of these charts through this time and the evolution. And if we're talking about Saturn and Neptune, they've always been attached to Russia, you know, and to the USSR before it. So seeing changes happening there and possible changes in regime. And if not, you know, we could see the world approaching to the next stage by the spring of 2026. So this is a time that I think is pivotal for the world and deciding how this world is going to be. And I'm not talking about the full moon as something that is signifying it, but is culminating, you know, an emotional process that is being birthed, in a sense. that's about everything I had to say.
Well, interestingly, that will be just after the election here in the US,
Right. Exactly.
which is a huge thing. And, you know, and the buildup and we were talking before we started recording, that the buildup of the misinformation and you know the Jupiter and Gemini, and that here comes Mars to, you know, inflame it. And it's going to be an interesting few months for sure.
And I see Robin said that she just had breaking news that Joe Biden is out of the race. Here we go.
Well, yeah, is it true or
Well,
I had heard
Exactly.
yeah,
With all
it's
the
saying,
disinformation and
I was
misinformation,
just
you never
told that
know.
it was just announced on MSNBC.
well, yeah,
we don't know who controls
I know, we
it.
have to wait before we really know.
right, yeah.
Because there's a lot of
should we look
propaganda all
at
the
should we
time.
look at
a lot of
Biden's chart to
manipulation.
now? Sorry, should we look at Biden's chart like now?
He's got a
Let's do
Scorpio.
that. You want me to share it?
Sure.
I'm just like just curious, you know.
Wait a second.
It's like we've become the news channel.
Yeah, I mean, somebody just told me this, so
Yeah, I can see on the news it is like it's in the news
Okay,
right now
here
as
we
well.
go. So Biden and the inner wheel right now on the outer one. If you want me to add any planets or asteroids, please let me know.
Just looking at, well, we got that transiting Mars over his
Yeah,
natal Uranus
descendant.
retrograde coming up. Jupiter.
And we have the full moon just over his Jupiter Pluto midpoint, I think. No,
Yeah.
not a midpoint, but somewhere in between.
Pluto square his moon.
Right, yeah. I think that's the
Yeah,
biggest.
that's the big one. It squares his moon. The new moon does as well. The full moon does as well.
Yeah. And that full moon that you were showing in November also is right on his Scorpio stellium with Uranus opposing his sun.
Right.
well, you know, a lot of us have been saying that we didn't think he was gonna be in the race. I mean, astrologically.
True.
This is one of the topics that'll be covered in the EA online conference. Kim Marie is going to do an entire lecture on the elections and the election charts. So
Well, and it may be totally different by then, you know.
I feel like information is changing on the daily. So it's
Yeah, that's
On the
Uranus.
minutely.
Yeah. He's a
Yeah.
good guy, you know. And it
Yeah,
seems
I'm
that good
concerned.
guys, even in the halls of, you know, the capital, everywhere, not just in the States, are
Right.
growing fewer and fewer. And in a sense, all the grays are turning into whites and blacks.
Yeah.
So we could see things clearer.
Well, and I noticed that Mercury is approaching his Chiron, and that Chiron is right in the mix of all of the you know, the Trump and Vance Leo stuff. And it's like, you know, the over exuberance of Leo has been on definitely on show. And I'm sure will continue to be as we now are, you know, about to enter Leo season with the sun.
Fun, fun, fun. Can't wait. Like, I mean, for me here in Israel, it's like a bad dream getting worse all the time, you know? It's like, haven't you had enough?
Right. Haven't we had enough?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
when does it when does it start getting better? Or, you know, do we trust that it will?
That's the
can't. We
thing.
have to take personal responsibility and make it so.
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
Yeah,
And
right.
that's the confusion is, how do we steer this, and guide it and help it, instead of feeding the frenzy which is how I'm, looking at it.
It's all about reclaiming our power.
Mhm.
And basically, the distribution of wealth and power is at the core of it. And until that changes, not much will. And
Right.
for that to change, we really need to reclaim our own power and to understand that the power is ours, always has been, always will be, and it can't be taken away. And that's a process.
Mhm.
Yes, and it's so hard to keep that in mind with about that our power is can't be taken away when it appears to be. It's the illusion, the Neptunian illusion of things. In my opinion, that it seems like, and I keep saying things aren't always as they appear, but oh my God.
Sure. I mean, the whole point of oppressive power is that the oppressor uses the belief of power to take power from people who have otherwise have their own sovereignty, their own autonomy. And,
Exactly.
you know, and so the dismantling of oppression, for one, like the people who profit from wealth and power will not want to give that up. And I think Nia was really pointing that out. It's like the throes of the 29th degree is I'm going to go to the nth degree to maintain the illusion of power because that's what feeds that kind of evil. And at the same time, the dismantling for people who have been oppressed of those systems is complicated, and it is individual. As she's saying, it's a very deeply individual. And I think once there is a break in consciousness, it's like once you realize that the sky is blue only because you've been taught that it's blue, you begin to systematically question everything in your life. And that creates a perpetual unraveling that so many people are naturally going to be forced into as a result of looking at what's happening in the world and having to face this discomfort that this has to change, and I have some responsibility in my own life to change it for myself. And then that all of a sudden it's like, if you've been in a abusive marriage for many, many years, and all of a sudden one day you wake up and you realize that you can leave the marriage, that realization of your own freedom and your sovereignty doesn't mean that you're done. You still have to leave and start a new life and get divorced, and that process is a long time. And the reclamation of your own trust in yourself and your faith that you can create a different life, and the belief that you're worthy of love if you've been in an abusive situation for a long time. I mean, we've been collectively in an abusive marriage for
Yes.
hundreds of years.
Forever.
Where
Right.
people literally believe things about the feminine, about the mother, about the earth, and about domination and control that is, it's heartbreaking when you realize it. But just because we realize it and we want to leave the marriage doesn't mean that the steps that we have to take personally to exit the situation are not going to be uncomfortable or difficult. And I think that's a bit of what you're speaking to as well.
Very
Mm.
well said.
Coming out of
Yeah.
Plato's cave.
Yeah.
But the Pluto retrograde that's coming up in Leo, I feel speaks to this.
Mm.
It will be a period of, internalizing the conscious desire nature. So figuring out what actions am I taking? Is it helping the evolutionary intentions of your own soul journey? but also the collective soul journey. And that's that creative power that Neo has been speaking about. What power do I have? And we do have power to make a difference. It's the small changes that add to the bigger changes. And it's taking control, taking your power back, taking control of that in that Pluto-Mars opposition that's going to happen. Can't remember exactly when that's going to happen, but that's also calling it that. What do we need to throw off in order to break the old structures that don't make sense? That's what it points to. It's not that they physically are breaking down. Something's not making sense in one's own life and also collectively. So what do we need to throw off? And that retrograde period will be that acceleration process that we've spoke about. The power, what actions will we take once Mars goes direct in Leo? And that's where the power we'll have that chance, that opportunity will be there. And I feel it's always there. It's the direction we choose to take it in.
We have Daniel Fiverson here with us, who's going to be on the next panel, but he has something that he would like to add to the conversation. Daniel, can you, are you able to unmute? Can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I turned my mic off besides online. You gals are so eloquent. I don't know that I can actually speak with the same eloquence, but I'm going to try. A couple of things pop out at me. I love everything that you've said. First of all, I think as astrologers, we have a tendency to look at the chart and not as much look at what's happening in the world around us. They're reflections of each other. And because we can't really make predictions, I don't like to make predictions. We're not psychic. We're intuitive, but we're not necessarily psychic. I think we have to really pay attention to our outer world, as much, if not more, than what's going on in the chart, because we all know, Jeffrey taught us that chart has 1,001 different ways that it can work. So we can't just look at it and overlay what we think is going to happen. The second thing that I think we have to recognize is that all the people who come to us for readings are at least highly individuated, if not spiritualizing. And we certainly all fall into that group. So, again, we have perceptions and observations and understandings that the other 80% of the world does not have. The core concept of evolutionary astrology is metamorphosis through karmic necessity. And what we are experiencing is global collective karmic necessity. The Pisces that's going on, Pisces is just so damn difficult because it can be so scary. And what's happening, the more that we understand of what is coming down the road, the scarier it gets. Okay. So we have to find that place inside ourselves that we understand. I come back to the phrase, I say it to my clients and I tell myself it, too often. It's going to be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's because it's not the end. But I'm doing a totally different talk later. It's really focused on Eris, and I'm looking at Eris and Pluto, but I'm looking out 8 years from now. And I don't see any relief in the next 2 or 3 years. I just don't see it. And the way that things are building, we're going to have to go through some really difficult times. Luckily, all of us are here to guide, to help those who are going to be around us, who are going to want to understand what the F is happening, what the F is happening. That's our job, okay? That's our job. We're doing our best to rescue ourselves, our partners, our children, our families, our friends, but it's bigger than that, okay? A lot of us are talking about leaving the country, but that only helps us. That doesn't help what's going on here. So that's my 2 cents. That's how I see it. So thank you for the opportunity to relieve myself of all of that. Thank you.
Well put. So well put.
Bless you all.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank
Yes,
you.
and leaving the country it is only a geographical, as they call it in 12-step program.
I
It's
know.
a round world. We
Yeah,
forget it's a
exactly.
round
You
world.
can't get away from it.
The alcoholics.
No, what happens here is going to affect the whole world.
Half my friends left Israel. Whoever can left Israel. The only reason I'm here now is because I wouldn't leave without my daughter, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and leaving, I mean, the problems still exist. I mean,
Exactly.
I mean, that's the whole premise of, the geographical, you can move, but, the problems don't go away. They're still there.
Yeah, Europe isn't any better right now, so yeah, it's a collective feeling worldwide.
We're in our house. We're in our house for 20 years. We have a medicine wheel. We have an energetic grid. We have all these frequencies that are coming in from just different sources of where would we go that's going to be safer than where we are is the bottom line that we keep coming back to. So
Space.
right. We have to work with what is, not with what. Yes, we're dreaming another world, and that dream is emerging, but it's sketchy at the moment.
Yeah.
I just realized too that the Mars is squaring the nodes, in Biden's chart today.
yes.
So that Mars trine Pluto, also so Mars' moon and Mars is squaring the nodes, and so that's
Maybe
pretty-
his astrologer told him to step down, huh?
I don't know about that.
Or his intuition, his
Yeah.
inner voice.
But it's
Yeah.
definitely, it's approaching his Uranus, square to the nodes. So something, when Daniel was talking about the karmic, how we're in this karmic evolutionary thing,
Necessity.
whether we're actively choosing our evolution or whether we're participating in the crisis of the karmic necessity of our evolution, is based, I think, on the level of consciousness that is meeting that evolutionary journey.
But Michelle, don't both of those factions have to be active in order to move this thing forward?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they do,
Right.
Yeah.
Does anybody know Michelle Mache, who had a show online for a number of years? I've done her show for a few years. She's no longer online. She's not lost the platform. She predicted Biden not being president 6 months ago.
There were several astrologers that did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Rick Levine
she's
has
a-
said
All
that
astrologers are talking about. It's always why I'm like, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about something
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
know.
didn't think he would be alive, truthfully, Like I thought
Well,
his
yeah.
health would suffer more than it did.
Yeah, I know I've seen Rick Levine say that he doesn't think either one of them are going to be in the election.
Right,
But-
right. I've heard that.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
would be nice.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to regrow an ear.
Yeah, that we didn't get any, we didn't really get any validation about his condition concerning that.
You're muted,
Hi.
Michelle.
Politics.
It's probably good.
So do we have anything else that we want to pursue at this point, or should we wrap up and kind of, anybody want to sum up?
Let's leave in a hopeful note, though,
Oh yeah, exactly. That's where I was headed.
So if I can
As-
come back to what Michael was saying, that the bottom line is that you have to make where you are, wherever you are, the safest, most homely, most loving, flourishing, blooming, safe place that there is. I mean, I equated to going through a very big oceanic storm with your sailboat. And the seas are roaring and the sky is dark. You don't know where the sun is. But in the cabin, There's warm yellow lights, and it's warm, and it's dry, and we're serving dinner. Why don't you sit down? And that's something we have to remember as part of our personal responsibilities to ourselves and indeed to our communities, because if we become part of the desperation, you know, like Tolkien tried to tell us in The Lord of the Rings, like Gandalf tried to tell everyone in The Lord of the Rings, if desperation conquers us, indeed, darkness has already won, you know?
I totally agree with that. I think what's been coming to mind is that faith, is the belief in the unseen. We really have to apply that to an evolutionary bridge being crossed that actually brings humanity closer to its source, that actually brings us closer to our source, and that whatever darkness emerges in these years is a necessary purification process, that Pluto is that necessary purification process. And we're just going to be, as Daniel was saying, kind of way showers, and in a way, staying true to knowing that this is an evolutionary process, that we've chosen to be here at this time. We absolutely signed up for this. I more and more clearly am seeing and believing that the soul chooses when it wants to be here. And it does so because each and every soul is given a purpose to actualize in that way, and that we each have to just find that personal purpose and that personal responsibility to actualize in that purpose. And that Leo polarity point is just going to keep pushing us back to that creative actualization, bringing our voice forward, being a beacon of light, a beacon of hope, finding the truth within, remaining objective and discerning about what we do with our lives, and using this restructuring collectively to help us to create a more healing and whole environment in the world that we live in, where we can make a difference.
I would take that one step further to say we also choose our parents, our brothers and sisters, our families, the whole thing. I mean, it's it's all in that Pluto polarity point. Well, in Pluto's south node is really the place to look for it. So yeah.
And North Node.
I was just going to add, as the final Pluto in Capricorn transit, I've personally felt this year a lot more. It's connecting, understanding what the divine masculine and divine feminine essentially is, and that's within. And it's working with getting those balance right within and helping your clients, people around you, whoever you connect with, find that balance. And once we've got that balance, before we move fully into Pluto and Aquarius and that polarity point of Leo, we can collectively build that community, that tribe, where our creative purpose is a joint. It's not individual. Though it's individually we're doing something, but for a collective purpose, a collective goal, and which is our collective humanity and oneness, and building Gaia, back up to the essential truth of what she is, our home and our mother.
Well, and to add on to that, I think that Pluto and Neptune both at the anaretic degree is no accident. It's for us to, get to this point and then push forward. Here we go.
Nurture the garden within.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing.
You have, I know.
Literally.
Jalaluddin Rumi has a beautiful poem that ends with something like that. I'm not sure I'm exact. Be melting snow. Wash yourself off yourself. A white flower grows in the silence. Yeah. So
Beautiful.
he was right.
Very nice. And on that note, thank you all. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
We'll
thank you
all
all.
Thank you,
A
everyone.
little
Thank you.
Yeah.
well wishes.
Thank you for this opportunity just to get align and get a different perspective and understand that sometimes you sit here thinking, even as an astrologer doing this work, am I alone? Am I the only one thinking this? But to do something like this and to see, yes, we're thinking the same, all the conscious evolution of everybody around us, it's reassuring, but yeah.
That it is. Thank you for saying that.
Since Bradley wasn't here, I had to step in. I couldn't let you girls carry it all by yourself.
Thank you. And we'll see you in the
Yeah,
next
we look
one.
forward to seeing you in the next panel.
Yeah.
Bye,
We'll
everyone.
be back
Take care.
at 12
Thank
noon.